It's Flashcard Friday at Math Science History, and today we are traveling back to the 8th century to explore the life of a man who helped rescue learning from the brink of oblivion, Alcuin of York. Alcuin isn't exactly a household name, but if you've ever benefited from the structure of a classroom, marveled at a manuscript, or even just read a sentence with clear punctuation, you might owe a nod to Alcuin. But first, a quick word from my advertisers. He was a scholar, a teacher, a poet, a theologian, and a key figure in what we now call the Carolingian Renaissance. Today's episode uncovers the story of a man who championed learning in a time of turmoil, preserved ancient knowledge, and quietly helped spark the revival of Western education. So, let's begin in a city not often in the spotlight. York, in what is now northern England. York in the 700s was no backwater. It was one of the most important cities in Anglo-Saxon England, known for its cathedral school and library. It was here, around 735 CE, that Alcuin was born. While we don't have a detailed biography from his own time, we know he was a Northumbrian by birth and was educated at the cathedral school at York under Archbishop Egbert. This school was one of the finest in Europe at the time, known for its scriptural and classical learning. The York Library contained works by Augustine, Virgil, Cicero, and Bede. Alcuin, a bright and eager student, rose through the ranks quickly. By the 760s, he had become head of the school, and his reputation as a teacher and intellectual blossomed. Alcuin had a gift, not only for learning, but for explaining complex ideas in accessible ways. His students adored him. His correspondence reveals a warm, personal touch. He often used affectionate nicknames for his pupils and maintained strong relationships long after they had left York. But Alcuin's story really takes off when he meets the most powerful man in Europe, Charlemagne. In 781, Alcuin traveled to Rome on a mission for York's new archbishop. On the way, he encountered Charlemagne in Parma, and it was a meeting that would change both their lives. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, was on a mission of his own to unite and educate his vast empire. He understood that military conquest wasn't enough. He needed to revive learning, standardize religious practices, and train capable administrators. Alcuin seemed heaven-sent. Charlemagne invited Alcuin to join his court at Aachen and lead what would become a cultural and intellectual revival. Alcuin was loyal to York and hesitant to leave his homeland, but after some hesitation, he agreed. So Alcuin of York became the intellectual architect of the Carolingian Renaissance. So I'm going to pause here to explain that phrase, Carolingian Renaissance. This was not a renaissance in the 15th century Florentine sense, but a conscious and coordinated effort in the late 8th and early 9th centuries to revive learning, art, and religious unity under Charlemagne's rule. Alcuin was placed at the center of this movement, overseeing reforms in education, liturgy, and textual preservation. At Charlemagne's Palace School, Alcuin gathered a circle of scholars, most of whom adopted pseudonyms from classical antiquity. Alcuin took the name Flaccus Albinus. Charlemagne styled himself as David, referencing the biblical king, and this was more than pretension. It was a mission. They saw themselves as heirs to Rome and early Christianity. Alcuin's role included standardizing the Latin Bible, known as the Vulgate, advising on church doctrine, and perhaps most famously, designing and promoting a new curriculum based on liberal arts. Alcuin helped popularize the classic model of education, dividing the curriculum into Trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and the Quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. This wasn't just academic compartmentalization. These subjects were seen as necessary tools for interpreting scripture and running on a well-governed state. Alcuin wrote manuals and dialogues to help teach these subjects. And one of the most charming is a collection of mathematical problems presented in riddle form, often called propositions ad acquendos juvenes, or problems to sharpen the young. These weren't just logic puzzles, they trained students in reasoning and problem solving. So here's an example. A man comes to a river with a wolf, a goat, and a cabbage. He has a boat, but it can only carry himself and one other. How does he get all three across the river safely? Does this sound familiar? That's right. Alcuin helped popularize one of the world's oldest logic puzzles. Alcuin wasn't a flashy public intellectual. He preferred letters to speeches, students to soldiers, scrolls to swords. Yet his influence was profound. He helped establish a standardized Carolingian minuscule script, which was a clear, legible form of Latin writing that allowed manuscripts to be more easily read and copied. It's thanks to this script that many ancient texts survived the Middle Ages and made their way to the Renaissance. Without Alcuin's influence, much of our classic heritage might have vanished. He also oversaw the correction and preservation of important religious texts. Before printing errors crept in with each hand copy, Alcuin and his circle compared versions and painstakingly corrected inconsistencies. His efforts helped preserve not just Latin grammar, but the theological consistency of the Western Church. In his later years, Alcuin retired from court life and became abbot of the monastery at St. Martin in Tours, a major center for manuscript production. Even there, he never stopped working. He continued writing, corresponding, and mentoring young scholars. He also became a theological advisor, helping to counter heresies and guide church doctrine. Alcuin died in 804. His final letters reflect humility, gratitude, and faith. He was buried at Tours, and though he was never canonized, he is often affectionately referred to as a saint in scholarly circles. Alcuin's legacy is like that of a river, quiet, steady, but transformative over time. He helped preserve the writings of antiquity, shaped the future of education, and fostered a culture of scholarship that endured long after the Carolingian Empire collapsed. His influence stretched far beyond his lifetime. The educational models he promoted would shape monastic schools and eventually universities. The manuscripts his scribes preserved kept the voices of Aristotle, Cicero, and Augustine alive. But more than that, Alcuin demonstrated the power of peaceful intellect in an age of swords. He was not a conqueror. He was a curator of culture. In his letters, he urged rulers to be just, priests to be wise, and students to be curious. He believed in the transformative power of learning and proved it. So before I conclude, I'm going to share a few interesting tidbits. Alcuin's puzzles inspired generations of mathematicians and logicians, and some are still used today in classrooms. The Alcuin Club still exists today, promoting high standards in liturgical scholarship. The Carolingian minuscule script that Alcuin helped standardize eventually influenced the development of our modern lowercase alphabet. So why should we remember Alcuin of York? Well, he reminds us that progress isn't just made on battlefields or in parliaments or in presidencies. It's made in classrooms, libraries, and quiet moments of reflection. He turned a tide of cultural decay into a wave of renewal. He built bridges between the ancient and the medieval worlds, and in doing so, he preserved the knowledge that would eventually ignite the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the modern era. And so the next time you pick up a book, solve a logic puzzle, or read a clearly punctuated sentence, take a moment to thank a quiet scholar from York who believed that wisdom, once shared, could shape the world. And if you're looking for the answer to that riddle from before, here it is. The problem with this situation is that the goat will eat the cabbage and the wolf will maul the goat. So how does he get them all across the river? First, he takes the goat across the river. He returns empty-handed. He takes the cabbage over, but he returns with the goat. Arriving at the other side, he leaves the goat and takes the wolf over to the other side to be with the cabbage. Then he makes another trip back to get the goat. And so then he takes the goat across the river to be with the wolf and the cabbage. And he still keeps his eye on the cabbage. So there you go. Thanks for listening to Flashcard Fridays at Math, Science, History. Until next time, carpe diem.